Hey everyone, welcome back to Study Hall. I love a good question. A question that really makes you think and rethink those assumptions. And today we're diving into a topic that's sure to spark some debate. Individualism versus collectivism.
Yeah, classic philosophical tug of war. And it's not just an academic debate either. These values, they really shape how we live, how societies function.
Exactly. It's like woven into everything, family dynamics, political systems, even social media.
Oh, absolutely. And today we're going to trace these contrasting worldviews through all of that. Think philosophy, religion, economics, politics, you name it. It's all connected.
It's like a global scavenger hunt for the roots of these values. And we'll see how they shape our world today.
I like that. A scavenger hunt. So where do we begin our search?
Well, any good scavenger hunt needs a starting point, right? So let's rewind the clock way back to ancient Greece. It's the birthplace of Western philosophy and the cradle of individualism.
Okay, I'm picturing it sunny Athens, the agora, bustling with ideas.
Right. Imagine you're strolling through the marketplace and bam, you bump into Socrates.
Oh boy, Socrates. Get ready for some serious questions. He was notorious for challenging everyone to think for themselves.
Didn't he say something like, the unexamined life is not worth living? Something like that.
That's the one, a classic mic drop moment. And that emphasis on critical thinking, on individual reflection, that's like Individualism 101.
It's like the bedrock of Western thought.
Absolutely. But Socrates got the ball rolling. His student, Plato, really fleshed out the individual's role in society.
So how did Plato view this whole individual society thing?
Well, Plato believes that a just society needed individuals to use their unique talents. Imagine like a symphony, each instrument playing its part to create this harmonious whole.
I get it. So it's not just about me. It's recognizing that everyone has a unique contribution to make.
Exactly. But Plato was still all about hierarchy, philosopher kings at the top guiding everyone else. It was actually his student, Aristotle, who took this idea of individual potential a step further.
Okay, so Aristotle. What was his take on individualism?
Aristotle believed that the goal of life was to flourish, to achieve eudaimonia. It's like self-actualization, and he saw it as a very individual pursuit. He stressed personal virtue, reason, living in accordance with nature.
So it's like Aristotle saying, hey, level up your character, folks. Develop your talents, make wise choices, and you'll live a fulfilling life.
Exactly, and that focus on personal agency. Striving for excellence.
Yeah.
Classic hallmarks of Western individualism.
Okay, so we've got Socrates, Plato, Aristotle laying this philosophical foundation.
Yeah.
But there's another group we can't forget about. The Stoics.
Yes, the Stoics, masters of self-control and resilience.
It is what it is, folks. How they fit into this individualism thing?
Well, they really honed in on this idea that you can't control external events, but you can control your reactions. This focus on self-reliance and inner peace became another key ingredient in Western individualism.
So even in chaos, you choose your response.
Exactly. Like that saying, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. The Stoics were all about mastering that 90%.
Okay, so we've got the Greeks laying the philosophical groundwork. But what about the Romans? They weren't exactly known for sitting around and pondering, were they?
No, they weren't. But they took those Greek philosophical seeds and planted them right in their legal and political systems.
So togas and trials.
You got it. They developed this sophisticated system of laws and institutions that recognized and protected individual rights.
Wait, so they weren't just about conquering and building aqueducts. They cared about laws, too.
Absolutely. Their early legal code, the 12 Tables, it was a game changer. It established the principle of written law applied equally to all citizens.
So no more off with their heads on a whim.
Precisely. And later on, during the Roman Empire, they came up with even more sophisticated legal concepts, like personal liability. For instance, the lex Aquilia. It let people seek compensation for harm.
Wow, they had laws to protect individual property rights way back then. That's amazing.
It was a huge step. And then there's their idea of citizenship.
Right. Civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen. I always loved that line. But it meant something, right?
Oh, it was more than just a phrase. It was a statement of belonging and rights, Roman citizenship, unlike in earlier civilizations. It wasn't just about where you were born, you could earn it. And it gave you legal protections, economic opportunities, even political participation.
So even if you weren't born into a wealthy family, you could work your way up and become a Roman citizen. That's pretty cool.
Exactly. This system of citizenship, along with those legal innovations, really solidified individual rights and responsibilities in Western thought.
It's amazing how those ancient Roman ideas still influence legal systems today. But while the West was building up this individualism thing,
Right.
a very different worldview was emerging in the East, wasn't it?
You got it. Time to trade those togas for silk robes and head east.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Let's explore the world of collectivism, starting with Confucianism.
Right. Confucianism, it's arguably the cornerstone of Eastern thought. It's all about social harmony, duty to the group, and respecting authority.
So let's break it down. What are the key principles that make Confucianism so different from Western individualism?
Well, one of the core tenets is Ren, often translated as benevolence or humaneness. It's all about empathy, compassion, acting with consideration for others.
So instead of that Greek idea of individual virtue leading to personal fulfillment, Confucianism sees virtue as a way to benefit everyone.
Yeah, that's a big difference. Confucius believed that a harmonious society is built on strong relationships, and those relationships thrive when everyone acts with Ren.
Okay, so everyone's striving to be kind and considerate. Sounds utopian, but I'm guessing it's not always that easy in practice, is it?
Well, human nature is complicated. Conflict is inevitable. But Confucianism gives us a framework for navigating those conflicts in a way that preserves harmony. Rememberedly, it means proper behavior, rituals, respect for tradition.
Right, like bowing to elders, showing deference to authority figures. It's all about maintaining order and respect.
Exactly. They provide structure to social interactions, guidelines for understanding your role and responsibilities within the group.
So less about think for yourself and more about think about your impact on the group.
You got it. And maybe the most defining feature of Confucian collectivism is filial piety, or zhao, which stresses deep respect for parents and ancestors.
That sense of family duty, it's so central to many Eastern cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that connect to the bigger picture of collectivism?
Well, it's not just about mom and dad. It's about honoring your whole lineage, understanding that you're part of something bigger, this reverence for elders. It extends to society in general. Respecting authority is seen as crucial for maintaining harmony and stability.
Okay, and that ties into the 5 relationships, right? Ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, older and younger brother, and friend and friend. And each relationship has a clear hierarchy and obligations.
Exactly. It's a structured system that reinforces those collectivist values. It discourages rebelling or putting yourself first, all in favor of social order.
Wow, talk about a contrast with Western ideas of challenging authority.
For sure. But Confucianism isn't the only force at play here. We can't forget about Buddhism, can we?
Oh, right. Buddhism. It started in India, but spread all through East Asia, adding another layer to this collectivist worldview.
Right. Confucianism provides the social structure, and Buddhism offers a spiritual framework. It emphasizes selflessness, compassion, and interconnectedness.
So how do those Buddhist ideas actually complement those Confucian values?
Well, Buddhism teaches that suffering stems from clinging to individual desires, and this illusion of a separate self. Instead of chasing personal achievement, it encourages us to seek enlightenment through selflessness, compassion, recognizing our interconnectedness.
Hold on, the self is an illusion. That's pretty different from the Western idea of building a strong individual identity.
Yeah, it's a fundamental difference in how the East and West view the self. In Western thought, the self is the starting point, the autonomous agent driving everything in Buddhist thought. The self is something to be transcended, to be seen through. It's about understanding that we're all part of this larger web of life.
So less about what do I want, and more about how can my actions benefit everyone. That's a different way to look at it.
Absolutely. And you see this emphasis on compassion and collective well-being playing out in many East Asian societies today. Social harmony and cooperation are prioritized over personal ambition. Humility and service are valued more than individual achievement.
So it's not that people in Eastern cultures don't have personal goals.
Yeah.
But those goals are often shaped by a sense of responsibility to the group.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between individual fulfillment and collective well-being.
And this is reflected in everything, from family dynamics to workplace culture to how people interact in social settings.
You got it. But wait, there's more. We can't leave out Taoism, can we?
Taoism. That's the one that always seemed a bit mystical to me. All the talk about the Tao and yin and yang, going with the flow.
Yeah, Taoism, also known as Taoism, adds another dimension to the conversation. It offers a more nature-centered approach to collectivism, emphasizing harmony, humility, adapting to the natural flow of life.
So how does that tie into collectivism?
Well, imagine a school of fish moving through water, each one responding to the currents and each other. That's the Taoist idea of wu wei, or effortless action. It's about aligning with the natural order, not forcing your will on the world.
It's like the opposite of that go-getter attitude so celebrated in the West.
Exactly. Taoism challenges that Western focus on ambition and striving. It suggests that real fulfillment comes from aligning with the Tao, the natural order of the universe, and living in harmony with others. It's a philosophy that encourages us to see ourselves as part of a larger interconnected whole, not just isolated individuals.
You know, when you see how indirect communication and respect for elders are so important in many East Asian cultures, it reminds you how much Taoism still shapes social interactions. It's like those ancient values are still subtly influencing how people behave.
Absolutely. Taoism, along with Confucianism and Buddhism, has woven itself into the very fabric of East Asian cultures, influencing everything from art and literature to social customs to political philosophies.
So we've got this fascinating blend of traditions shaping Eastern collectivism.
Yeah.
But how did these contrasting worldviews, Western individualism and Eastern collectivism, actually play out in the real world? How did they shape the course of history, the rise and fall of empires, and the development of political and economic systems?
That's a great question. And it's one we'll dive into as we continue our exploration of these contrasting cultural landscapes, from the rise of democracy and capitalism in the West to the enduring influence of imperial rule and state-controlled economies in the East. These values have shaped destinies and the lives of billions.
No, buckle like everyone. We're about to explore the historical and political currents that further shape this fascinating divide between individualism and collectivism.
Get ready for some epic clashes of ideologies, surprising twists and turns, and a deeper understanding of how these contrasting values continue to shape our world today. So last time we were talking about the philosophical and religious roots of individualism and collectivism, and now we're going to shift gears a little bit and look at how these ideas actually played out in the real world, how they shaped political and economic systems.
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about these abstract ideas like individual rights or social harmony. But how did those values actually influence the way societies were structured and governed? You know what I mean?
Right. That's where things get really interesting. Let's start with the West.
Okay.
Imagine it's the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe. It's a period of huge intellectual and cultural change, the Enlightenment.
Ah, the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Think powdered wigs, fierce debates in coffee houses, revolutionary ideas challenging the old guard. It's like the intellectual equivalent of a rock concert. Right?
It was a time of radical ideas, for sure. Thinkers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire. They championed reason, individual rights, limited government. They questioned the authority of monarchs and the church. They argued that individuals should have more of a say in how they were governed.
So basically, they were planting the seeds for democracy, right?
Yeah.
No taxation without representation and all that.
Exactly. John Locke, for instance, he argued that individuals possess natural rights to life, liberty, and property rights that exist regardless of any government.
So it's not like the king or queen is graciously granting these rights. It's more like they're inherent to being human. They're part of our birthright, which was a pretty revolutionary concept back then, wasn't it?
It was a huge departure from the traditional view of power. Locke also argued that governments get their legitimacy from the consent of the governed, and that they should exist to protect those individual rights. Sound familiar?
It's like the foundation of modern democracy. No wonder those American colonists were big fans of Locke.
Absolutely. Locke's ideas had a huge impact on the American Revolution and the drafting of the U.S. Constitution. He provided the intellectual ammunition for those who wanted to overthrow British rule and establish a government based on individual liberty and popular sovereignty.
Okay, so Locke provided the framework for individual rights. But what about Jean-Jacques Rousseau? Didn't he have some interesting ideas about the social contract and the role of the collective?
Rousseau, while also being a champion of individual liberty, had a slightly different take on the relationship between the individual and society. He argued that individuals, though born free, choose to give up some freedoms to form a society and a government that protects their collective interests.
So it's like a trade-off. We give up some individual freedom in exchange for the security and benefits of living in a society.
Yeah.
But it has to be a fair deal, right?
That was Rousseau's whole point. He believed that the social contract should be based on the general will, meaning the common good of the people. And if the government doesn't uphold that contract, the people have a right to overthrow it.
It's like he's saying, hey, government, you work for us, not the other way around.
Precisely. Rousseau's ideas about popular sovereignty, the idea that power ultimately belongs to the people, influenced revolutionary movements all over Europe and beyond the French Revolution with its cry of liberty, equality, fraternity, was deeply inspired by Rousseau's vision of a society based on the general will.
Okay, so we've got Locke emphasizing individual rights, Rousseau focusing on the social contract. It seems like both of their ideas were really important in shaping how democracy developed in the West.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about Voltaire, another big name from the Enlightenment. He was all about freedom of speech, religious tolerance, the separation of church and state. He was a fierce critic of tyranny and superstition. He believed that reason and individual conscience should guide human affairs.
It sounds like these Enlightenment thinkers were all about empowering individuals and limiting the power of those traditional institutions.
Yeah.
It was a huge shift in thinking, wasn't it?
It was a seismic shift in Western thought, and those ideas continue to resonate today. But while all of this was going on in the West, what was happening in the East?
That's a good question. Were Eastern societies having their own version of the Enlightenment? With intellectuals challenging traditional hierarchies and demanding individual rights?
Not exactly. While the West was undergoing these huge transformations, many Eastern societies held on to their collectivist traditions. Imperial rule, especially in China and Japan, continued to stress hierarchy, social order, subordinating individual desires to the needs of the state.
So it's not that the East was totally stagnant, but those collectivist values remained a powerful force, shaping how societies were organized and how people live their lives.
Exactly. Let's take China as an example. Confucianism, with its focus on filial piety, loyalty to authority, upholding tradition, it provided a philosophical framework for their system of governance. The emperor, seen as the son of heaven, was responsible for maintaining harmony between heaven, earth, and society.
So it's not about individual rights or popular sovereignty. It's about fulfilling this divinely ordained role to ensure everyone's well-being.
Exactly. And this emphasis on hierarchy and collective responsibility wasn't just between the emperor and his subjects. It was everywhere, from the family to the village to the nation as a whole.
So that sense of duty to the group that we talked about earlier, it was woven into the very fabric of life in China.
Absolutely. And Japan, while having its own unique cultural and political traditions, was also deeply influenced by Confucianism, the Tokugawa shogunate, which ruled Japan for over 250 years, enforced a strict social hierarchy. Individuals were expected to fulfill their assigned roles in society.
So while the West was all about the self-made man and pursuing individual dreams, Japan was more about social stability and following tradition.
That's a key difference. And even as Japan went through a rapid modernization period during the Meiji era in the late 19th century, those collectivist values continued to influence how they approached economic development.
It's really interesting to see how these contrasting values played out in such different ways. But we can't forget about the economic revolution that was happening alongside these political shifts in the West.
You're talking about the rise of capitalism, right? The invisible hand of the market, as Adam Smith called it.
Exactly. Adam Smith and his free market principles, he really captured the spirit of that era. He argued that individual self-interest, when guided by competition and free markets, could actually lead to greater collective prosperity.
Smith believed that by letting individuals chase their own economic goals, society as a whole would benefit. It's that classic win-win idea.
So it's not just about being greedy. It's about creating a system where everyone has a chance to succeed based on their own effort and ingenuity.
Precisely. Smith said that government intervention in the economy should be limited, letting people freely trade, innovate, accumulate wealth. This philosophy, laissez-faire economics, it became a cornerstone of Western capitalism.
It's a big contrast to those Eastern collectivist economies we were talking about, where the state often had a much bigger hand in directing economic activity.
A fundamental difference. And as capitalism took root in the West, it reinforced those individualistic values we've been talking about, the entrepreneurial spirit, the idea that anyone with a good idea and a strong work ethic can make it. That's deeply ingrained in Western culture.
It's like this combination of democracy and capitalism created this powerful feedback loop. Democracy gave people the power to participate in government, and capitalism gave them the opportunities to pursue their own economic goals.
It's a symbiotic relationship that's really shaped the trajectory of Western civilization. But of course, these systems have also faced criticisms. The gap between the rich and the poor, the exploitation of workers, the environmental costs of unchecked economic growth. All of that has led to calls for more regulation and social responsibility.
So it's not a perfect system.
Yeah.
But it's one that's had a huge impact on the world, for better or worse. But what about the East? How did those collectivist values shape their economic development?
Well, Eastern societies, while being influenced by Western ideas and technology, generally took a different approach. They often preferred a more state-led approach to developing their economies. prioritizing things like national unity, social stability, long-term planning over individual entrepreneurship.
So it's not like they completely rejected capitalism, but they kind of adapted it to fit their own cultural context.
Exactly. Look at Japan, for example.
Wow.
After World War II, Japan had this amazing economic recovery, and in a lot of ways, it really embodied a unique kind of collectivism. Companies developed a strong sense of family among their employees. They offered lifetime employment, generous benefits. They focused on group harmony and making decisions by consensus.
So that strong sense of collective identity we talked about, it was channeled into economic productivity.
Exactly. It was a system that put loyalty, cooperation, long-term stability ahead of short-term profits or individual gain. And it worked. It helped Japan become one of the leading economic powers in the world.
It's a fascinating example of how collectivist values can actually drive economic success. But I imagine this model has some downsides too, doesn't it?
Of course. The lack of individual initiative and those rigid corporate hierarchies can sometimes stifle innovation and make it hard for companies to adapt when the market changes quickly.
That's true. There's no single perfect approach to economic development. Each system has its pros and cons. But as we move into the 20th century, we see these contrasting values playing out in even bigger ways. Bring on the 20th century, a time of global wars, ideological clashes, the rise of new superpowers. I'm ready for some historical drama.
It was a wild ride for sure. The West's embrace of democracy and capitalism. It was challenged by the rise of communist and socialist movements. They offered a different vision of society based on collective ownership and economic equality.
So instead of individual competition and chasing wealth, these movements were more about the common good and spreading the wealth around.
Exactly. And China, under Mao Zedong, became the biggest example of this alternative path. Mao's Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Those were radical attempts to create a truly collectivist society.
They were huge social experiments aimed at completely reshaping Chinese society, eliminating class differences, promoting collective ownership of land and industry. The idea was to put the needs of the many above the wants of the few. It's like they were trying to apply those collectivist values on a massive scale.
They were ambitious, to say the least. But as we know, these experiments had a terrible human cost. The Great Leap Forward led to widespread famine, and the Cultural Revolution unleashed a wave of political violence and social upheaval. It shows the dangers of taking collectivism too far, trying to erase individual identity and force a single vision on a complex society.
It's definitely a cautionary tale, even with good intentions.
Yeah.
Trying to engineer social change without really understanding human nature can have some really bad consequences.
Absolutely. And while China was experimenting with communism, Japan, after its defeat in World War II, started this remarkable economic recovery that in many ways embodied a different type of collectivism. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth revisiting in this context.
You're talking about those big Japanese companies like Toyota, Sony, Mitsubishi, right?
Yeah.
It was like the whole country was working together to rebuild.
Exactly. Japan's post-war economic miracle was fueled by a unique kind of corporate collectivism. Companies fostered a sense of family among their employees. They offered lifetime employment, generous benefits, and they really emphasized group harmony and consensus-based decision-making.
It's fascinating. But it seems very different from that Western focus on individual initiative and competition.
It is a different approach, for sure, but one that was really successful in Japan. It allowed them to rebuild their economy quickly and become a global economic power.
So we've got China trying out communism, Japan going all in on corporate collectivism, and the West promoted democracy and capitalism.
Yeah.
The 20th century was a whirlwind of competing ideologies.
It was a time of intense ideological struggle, but also a time of amazing innovation and social change, and those contrasting values are still shaping the world today. That's something we'll explore in the next part of our conversation.
All right, everyone, stay tuned. We're about to jump into the 21st century and see how individualism and collectivism are playing out in our hyper-connected, globalized world.
Get ready to explore how these age-old values are adapting to the challenges and opportunities of the digital age.
All right, so we've traveled through centuries of debates, revolutions, economic upheavals, and now it's time to fast forward to the present. How are these contrasting values, individualism and collectivism, how are they playing out in our hyper-connected, globalized world?
It's a big question, isn't it? I mean, we live in a world where borders are basically meaningless. Information travels at the speed of light, and cultures are constantly bumping into each other.
It's like we're all living in this massive global village trying to figure out how to get along, despite all our differences. You know, different backgrounds, beliefs, values.
And technology, especially social media, it's made those differences even more obvious. but it's also given us these new ways to connect and interact. It's a weird paradox, isn't it?
Right. Think about how people use social media in the West versus the East. It's like a perfect little example of these contrasting values.
Yeah. In the West, social media is often about self-promotion, sharing your opinions, building your personal brand. It's a place where individuality is celebrated, where you can hear all sorts of different voices.
It's like everyone's trying to stand out, to be the loudest voice in the room. Look at me. Listen to what I have to say. It can be a bit much sometimes, all that self-promotion.
Whereas in a lot of Eastern cultures, social media is more about strengthening group harmony, sharing common experiences, promoting national pride. It's less about the individual and more about the community.
So less about me, myself, and I, and more about we, us, and our shared identity.
Exactly. And this difference in values, you see it in everything, from what goes viral online to how people interact with each other.
You know, when you see those huge K-pop fandoms online, mobilizing to support their favorite groups, it's a powerful example of Eastern collectivism in action. It's not just about the music. It's about being part of something bigger, showing your loyalty, contributing to the group's success. It's fascinating how those values are playing out in the digital world.
It's a great example. And it's not just K-pop. You see it in online gaming communities, social activism movements, even in how people organize political protests.
It's like the internet is this giant petri dish where we can watch these cultural values evolve and adapt in real time. But it's not just an online thing, is it? This clash of values. It's happening in the business world, too.
Oh, definitely. We already talked about how Japanese corporate culture emphasizes loyalty and teamwork. But what happens when those values come up against Western-style individualism?
Yeah, I can see how that could cause some friction, especially when companies from different cultures try to work together.
Oh, for sure. It can definitely lead to some cultural misunderstandings. For instance, Western companies doing business in Japan, they often have to change how they manage things to fit those collectivist norms. Decision-making processes that might seem slow and too focused on consensus to a Western executive are just how things are done in Japan. They value being thorough and getting everyone on board before moving forward.
It reminds you that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to success in the global market. What works in one culture might not work somewhere else.
Exactly. And as China becomes a bigger and bigger player in the global economy, Western companies doing business there, they also have to learn to navigate those collectivist values, building strong personal relationships, understanding the importance of social networks, respecting those hierarchical structures. It's all crucial for success in China.
That concept of guanxi, those networks of personal connections and obligations, it's so different from the Western emphasis on contracts and legal agreements. It's like a whole different rule book.
It is a different approach, for sure. One that prioritizes trust reciprocity, long-term relationships. It's not just about closing the deal. It's about building something that benefits everyone. A sense of shared success.
It makes you wonder, as the world becomes even more interconnected, will these differences eventually disappear? Will we all become some kind of hybrid, blending individualism and collectivism? Is there a way to get the best of both worlds?
Who knows what the future holds? But it's very likely that these values will keep evolving and adapting. As cultures interact and learn from each other, we're already seeing signs of this. Younger generations in Eastern cultures are starting to embrace Western-style individualism. They're expressing themselves more openly. They're creating their own career paths.
Right. Think about all those entrepreneurs popping up in China and India, challenging traditional ways of doing things, building their own businesses. It's like they're taking what works from both worlds, combining that entrepreneurial drive with a deep understanding of their own cultures.
Exactly. And here in the West, there's a growing realization that community collaboration, social responsibility are important too. The rise of the sharing economy, for example, shows a shift away from pure individualism towards more cooperative ways of doing things.
It's like we're all searching for that balance between individual freedom and the well-being of the group. It's an ongoing experiment, and it's really fascinating to watch. But, hey, we've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this epic deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that understanding these differences, not judging them, it's crucial for navigating this increasingly complex and interconnected world, whether it's global trade, international diplomacy, or just trying to understand people from different cultures. Recognizing the interplay between individualism and collectivism is really important.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about recognizing that there are many ways to see the world, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. And by embracing those different perspectives, we can learn from each other and build a better future for everyone.
Well said. This has been a really fascinating exploration of these contrasting worldviews.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those questions coming. We'll be back next time on Study Hall with another thought-provoking topic. Until then, keep those minds curious.